evening, everyone, and welcome. Let's see, I'm just finishing up muting everyone. If you're not already muted, please do mute yourself. I'm thrilled to welcome you this evening to the first Sinister Wisdom event of our 2022-23 reading series. Our opening song was Seasons, Goodbye Summer Sun, just the last minute or so of it, by the musical group Teen Idol. We're putting more information about the music in the chat. This evening, as you know, we are gathered for a special conversation titled Reclaiming Archives, a conversation between Caitlin Abadir-Mullally and Shawn Smith-Cruz about archives and identity. My name is Julie Enzer. I'm the editor and publisher of Sinister Wisdom, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to this evening's event. Before we begin, one of our traditions is to have a land acknowledgement at the start of our programs. We are all located around the United States and around the world, many of us living on occupied, unceded territory and land. I am in what is now Dover, Florida, traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole, as well as other historical indigenous groups, including the Calusa and the Tacobaga. We pause to recognize the histories of war and colonization and to imagine collectively and work for a world where we have a fair and equitable distribution of resources. I invite folks gathered to share your location and the lands that you are living on. We have, as always, a chakra block hour planned for you. We'll wrap up around 8 p.m. East Coast time, including time for the traditional dance number at the end. Most of you are familiar with Sinister Wisdom. We are a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art. If you are not currently a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up for a subscription today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. Fall is our fundraising season, and we will have 2 fall fundraisers this year. One we launched yesterday to raise money for the publication of a special Sapphic classic titled A Sturdy Yes of a People, selected work by Joan Nessel. We'll put more information about that project in the chat. It exists both on the Sinister Wisdom website and on Facebook. We'll also do a general membership subscription drive at the end of October. I appreciate the many ways that lesbians lift up and support the work of Sinister Wisdom. If you believe in and support our work, please make a donation this fall. It really makes a difference to us. So a few quick housekeeping notes before I begin the program. Keep your microphones muted throughout. If we detect noise from you, we will mute you ourselves. There will be an opportunity at the end to unmute, wave, and cheer as we all dance together. As the program proceeds, if you want to show appreciation for the readers, wave your hands at the end of each reading. There's new research I was reading today that engaging in movement with both hands on Zoom results in a more gratifying opportunity, both for speakers, but also for all participants. We can see and feel each other's connections in more ways. You are also welcome to light up the chat on Zoom. We'll share the chat as a part of the recording of the program, and our speakers love always hearing what people are saying and connections that folks are making in the chat transcript. If you need technical assistance this evening, chat with my colleague Max Bacher, who's on tap for technical assistance and also running lots of media stuff. This is a multimedia program this evening. We are recording the entire event. We'll make it available starting tomorrow or Thursday at 2 sites on the Sinister Wisdom website, sinisterwisdom.org/SW125. And it will also be available on the webpage for Caitlin's podcast, sinisterwisdom.org/enduringvalue. Both of those are going in the chat for folks to check out. Finally, I have two special sneak peeks. One is that our next issue of Sinister Wisdom is back from the printer and beautiful. There'll be a formal cover reveal in mid-September, but I just couldn't resist sharing it with you all tonight. And also, as you've seen on email, if you're on the email list, our Sinister Wisdom calendar is in for the year. It's gorgeous. It's the smaller format. Beautiful artwork. They make great gifts. So I encourage you to order those before we run out of stock. So that's the end of my announcements. And now we move on to our program. This evening, we're having a conversation between Caitlin Abadir-Mullally and Shawn Smith-Cruz about lesbians, identity, and archiving. Caitlin has been with Sinister Wisdom all summer as the inaugural Creative Arts Fellow at Sinister Wisdom. She's been engaged in a variety of projects this summer, including working on her own archival project, Saffron, an LGBTQ+ SWANA archive. At that archive, she documents and shares access to celebrations, story, and moments of joy by diasporic, queer, Southwest Asian, and North African artists and creators. Through her fellowship at Sinister Wisdom, Caitlin, who goes by KT, conducted a series of conversations with artists about longevity and value and put them together as a podcast series called Enduring Value, which will be rolling out over the next 2 months. The first episode of the podcast is available today, and then we'll release subsequent episodes every 2 weeks between now and the end of October to complete the series. It's riveting. I've been listening to it over the weekend, and I encourage you all to download it. KT is joined in conversation today with Shawn Smith-Cruz, a longtime friend, supporter, and participant in the Sinister Wisdom community. Shawn will discuss her forthcoming book series, Grabbing Tea. Grabbing Tea, Queer Conversations on Archives and Practice, centers queerness in archives and archival theory and practice. Scholars and practitioners share their conversations on the archive as a site of reclamation, narrative storytelling, ancestral recalling, and historical revisioning within LGBTQ+ communities. So now I'm going to turn the program over to KT and Shawn. We begin with KT, and I hope you enjoy their presentations and their conversation.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Can we get the PowerPoint squared away? Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, welcome to Reclaiming Archives. Shawn's amazing, and I'm so grateful to be talking with you all and talking with Shawn. Yeah, about the work each of us are doing. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I am Coptic American, and I'm a lesbian. So these are some images from my thesis exhibition in undergrad, where I was really figuring out what it means to be a lesbian, what it means to be mixed race, and really collecting research and resources about people like me. And so you can see on the walls, there are photographs taken from my own family records. There's, well, you can't really quite see. There are articles from the Coptic Church. There are flyers from people who are demanding that Mina be recognized on the census, and a lot of kind of conversations between myself and other SWANA people, and people who are queer and not SWANA. And throughout this process of creating this piece, I explored archives. I explored archives in the US, archives like in Egypt, and I also looked at other places like ancient Egyptian themed porn. I looked anywhere where I thought I could find examples of like queerness and Egyptian identity. And it was quite a task. We can go to the next slide. So throughout the struggles of looking for people like me, looking for any sort of reflection, I didn't see the documentation of the amazing movements that have been happening over like the last 5 to 10 years by Swana people. And so I created this project over the last 2 years called Saffron, which is an LGBTQ+ Swana archive. Go to the next slide. So let's break down some of the acronyms. This is a map that kind of, it like approximately shows what is commonly known as Southwest Asia and North Africa. I'm gonna read a quote by my friend Mina, who really wonderfully explains why we use this term. SWANA stands for Southwest Asian North African, a description of the diverse area of the world, commonly known as the Middle East and North Africa. Southwest Asia and North Africa is an inherently mixed region with expansive ethno-religious groups who have established home across the world. This acronym has been used a lot in activists and academic circles and artist circles over the last 10 years because it really rejects this idea of understanding our placement in the world in reference to Europe. And it also holds space for people who aren't Arab, because I'm Coptic, who are the Christians of Egypt. And so I don't always identify as Arab. And there are people who are Assyrian and Druze and people who are all or ethnically diverse who have connections to this region and cultural ties and responses to environment. And this acronym really kind of like brings, like allows people to gather under these shared connections. We'll go to the next slide. So for more clarity, there was no words on that map. Here are a list of the countries who are, who we consider in the Swana region. And I say this with like hesitancy because, you know, borders are made up by people in power and people move and culture mixes, and especially in like such a key part of the world, such as like the Mediterranean. So here's a list of countries. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So as I was looking at building my project of Coptic Babe, Coptic Dyke, I was looking in archives for gay Egyptians. And I was looking in the one archives where I then worked for 2 years, which is an LGBT archive in Los Angeles. And the loudest story about gay Egyptians is about the Cairo 52. So some of you might be familiar with the Cairo 52. In 2001, this image of the boat is the Queen Boat Mary, which was a gay nightclub on the Nile. And it was raided by the police, and 52 men were arrested, and it was a very public event where there was like horrible instances of police brutality, and people's addresses and names were published in newspapers. And you can see that these images, which circulated all across the world, where men cut up their shirts to hide their faces because of how dangerous it became for a lot of these men. And seeing that this is this was a really pivotal moment in North African queer history, where it was kind of internationally recognized that this was, you know, like civil rights violation, but also like in the largest LGBT archive as a gay Egyptian, I had hoped that there would be more, like there'd be an example of something else that wasn't violent. Because a lot of these stories I found in archives and in research is that when you combine being Swana and being gay, you find stories of men and you find stories of death. Can we go to the next slide? So here is my project. Saffron, the point of Saffron is to document, preserve, and share access to celebration and stories and moments of joy by diasporic queer Swana artists and creators. I know so many people making beautiful work and doing amazing things, showing queer relationships thriving, but also like holding like the pain and the struggles that also come with being like, well, like stacking minorities, I guess, and religious trauma and cultural complications. So here's a picture of one of the record cartons, and some folders that are currently in the collection. We can go to the next slide. And you can see here, there are more examples of materials in the archives. We have a lot of zines and publications. We have set lists and cassette tapes and postcards and artwork. Not pictured, we have t-shirts. And actually, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, here's a list of the different kind of stuff that we collect. And it really ranges to all different kinds of ways people like make a mark on this world. And I really want to thank the William Way and the Lesbian History Archives, whose websites I've been on a lot to gather like this list of materials. Because this is how, yeah, it's really been an exciting process, telling people that their stories matter, and like the material they make is important, and it comes in all different kinds of forms. You can go to the next slide. So part of the process I've been going through with working on Saffron is building relationships with people and organizations. There are so many organizations like internationally that are loudly queer and loudly SWANA. Dardishi's is an amazing organization outside of Scotland. And Yellow Punk is here in Philadelphia, where I am. So I have like an incense burner and posters and t-shirts and a lot of photographs by amazing artists in the collection. We can go to the next slide. So part of the work that I'm doing on Saffron, it's not just collecting things and keeping them in my house. I am training to be an archivist. I am an independent archivist. And so I'm creating finding aids to make it easier for researchers to like explore the collections. Coptic Queer Stories is an online journal, online magazine that is so close to my heart. Like Mina's work literally changed my life. And so through my relationship with Mina and Coptic Queer Stories and the community of people involved with Coptic Queer Stories in the collection of Saffron, I have copies of the 21 interviews. So Coptic Queer Stories is based, the structure is Mina conducts interviews with individuals who are Coptic and queer all around the world. And so I have copies of all of the interviews, and I have copies of like the poetry people have submitted, and I have copies of, or like information about the community organizing, or like the community group that for parents and friends of Coptic queers. Also through Coptic Queer Stories and Progressive Cops and like Egypt Migration and several other progressive Egyptian orgs put together like a resource guide, like the resources on Coptic and Egyptian queerness collaborative doc, which is like a, I don't know, 15-page document where they like gathered links and names of books and movies, anything that has like representation of like Egyptian queerness. So dozens of people worked on this document, and I'm really excited to say that we have it in the archive. Yeah, Saffron is a growing project, and I'm working pretty hard to make it accessible to the public. We can go to the next slide. So as an artist and an archivist, a lot of the work in Saffron is by artists, a lot of artwork. And so I think about archival principles in relationship to the work of artists and writers and curators. And through my time at Sinister Wisdom, I was able to host a series of conversations with 4 different people who I really love and respect, about how they see like the longevity of their work as a curator, as a video maker, a writer, or an animator, and how they like determine like value and like the lifespan of their work. And so this Enduring Value podcast is actually, the first episode is available now on Spotify with Jane Becker, who's an art historian and artist based in Los Angeles. And you can, yeah, find that on there's a link in the chat. And so I believe that we're going to be sharing an excerpt of Sarah Trad's video piece. Sarah Trad's a really is a curator and a video artist who does amazing work.
I don't have the video on. I'm just sitting here listening.
Yeah, I hope the link to that video can be sent in the chat so that folks can watch it with sound when they get the chance, because it's really quite stunning. Yeah, thank you so much. I guess over to Shawn.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. I'm Shawn, and I think we're like swapping it out back to me. So I'm just going to start talking because it's already 7:23. How did that happen? So I didn't actually do or give Julie a bio. So she was just like, here's Shawn. She's writing a book. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. And actually, I really want to just get straight into talking to Katie, but I'll give you a few minutes of some background. So I co-edited a couple of issues of Sinister Wisdom. The first one that I did was with the Michigan Women's Music Festival. And then the other one that I did was the celebration of the Lesbian History Archive's 45th anniversary. So I'm one of the co-coordinators at the Lesbian History Archives. One of our co-founders is on the call, and another co-founder will be celebrated soon. So it's all very exciting to be a member of that collective. I'm also a librarian, and I'm still at work in my office at NYU. Okay, so I wanted to just get started to say that I'm really moved by the work that SWANA does, and I'm actually going to talk about archives from kind of a very back-end meta space. So it's not actually like stories about collections, which is not usually what people are like expecting to hear when they're thinking about archives. But like I, as a practitioner, like really enjoy the tangible, the tactile, the work of the processing of materials. So I kind of want us to talk about that, and I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to feel excited about it like I am. And I also want to get into conversation. So the book that I'm working on is actually about conversations with queer archivists. And I wonder if we're going to put the slides back up. Oh, I guess I had to ask. Thanks, Max. So the book title is called Grabbing Tea, Queer Conversations on Archives and Practice. And let me set my time so I don't go over 10 because that's all I want to speak. So doing that right now. And it's called Volume 2 because there's a first volume. The first volume is Libraries and Identity. So we got so many responses to the call that we had to split it in two. And If you go to the next slide, this specific volume centers queerness in archives and archival theory and practice. And there's the page for where it exists online. I am co-editing this alongside a colleague, Sarah Howard, who's a librarian for gender and sexuality studies at Princeton University. And as you can see, you probably can't see it, but it says there June 2022. It is almost September and it is still forthcoming. So I assure you that the manuscript is in, and so it's in process, and I still am excited to share it with folks. Even before it's ready. So when we submitted the proposal, we actually submitted it to this independent publisher called Litman Books, and they have a series on sexuality and gender. And I would say that they're the leader for the most relevant content that is directly related to both library and information studies and sexuality and the gender continuum. So if you are curious and interested, if you're like a library student, archival student, not sure where to begin, go to Litman Books, and I'm going to put a link to both that page and the, oh, look at that, it's already done. Well, there it goes, I already had it queued up, but thank you for posting it into the chat. Just so that you can get some more information about stuff in the series. So you can go to the next slide. The images that you're going to see that I'm using are by my wife, but an artist in her own right, Jasmine Smith-Cruz, who draws Taino Afro-Puerto Rican patterns of ancestral connection and has a lesbian aesthetic, or a lesbian eye, because lesbian drew it. So we're workshopping some of the images to incorporate into the cover art. So what is the project? The project is a series of conversations. When I met Sarah, I met her at a conference, and we were sort of trying to meet up, and I actually relate the project's timeline to my own child and birthing process and nursing, because the conference that we had, I was lactating, and I was looking for a lactation room. So I was a little bit discombobulated. So as you can see, I just want you to think of breasts and leaking breasts and milk in this conversation. But it was where we met, me struggling to milk and her struggling to find a seed and being late, and us saying we should grab a coffee. And really, when you say grab a coffee, you mean, or grab tea, you mean like get a drink. But I couldn't even do that because I was busy. I was busy lactating. So eventually we did have that conversation, and we put out a call. We asked librarians, scholars, and practitioners who work in libraries and archives, or those who work with libraries and archives, all of whom identify as queer, to share their conversations on the archive as a site for reclamation, for narrative storytelling, for ancestral recalling, historical revisioning, all within LGBTQ+ communities. And so with that came, for this volume, 16 conversations and 35 authors, and lots of data, lots of text. And I would say that we really came to a space where we understood that what we were hearing from these conversations was remarkable and themed. So if you go to the next slide, I actually pulled some of the themes out to just give a sense of here's what practitioners experience when they are doing the work of archiving themselves. So lots of self-archiving, so almost like what KT might be experiencing as she goes through her SWANA collections and through the processing of gathering other people's materials. And then as, you know, becoming an archivist, also what the challenges are for that. And I thought the best way to pull through some of these themes was to pull some quotes from the authors directly. So in conversations where there was notice of ancestral connection or honoring or genealogy, and lots of talk on Blackness within the archive, I pulled from two of my close professional friends. So you go to the next slide. I actually put a few pulled from some of the chapters, specific authors to highlight, but I'm not going to read from each person because then we would be here all night. But I did want to pull from Zakiyah Collier, who is a Black queer archivist and memory worker in New York City, because we grabbed tea the other night, and I thought, oh, let me pull from Zakiyah. And also Stephen Fulwin, who's a co-founder of the Manic Archivist Project, and they were in conversation, and their chapter, which is called Are You Family? Mapping the Genealogy of Black Queer Library Workers, it's interesting because it centers around this concept of who is family and how do we define an ancestral connection. So Zakiyah actually says, and I didn't put this into a place where you could paste it, so I can put that into the chat too. So Zakiyah says, I think it's okay to claim and reclaim. There it goes. To say, okay, maybe this is not how you identified in 1950, but I'd like to think that if you were here with us in 2020, ... So she's actually talking about the people that she's walked through as a new librarian, as a burgeoning archivist, thinking about community in an ancestral way. In a really Black sci-fi ancestral way. If Audrey were here with us in 2020, what would that look like? How would she identify? And what party scenes would she be a part of, if at all? It's all speculation, of course, but I think it's still important to ask the questions, if nothing else, just asking all the questions we can think of. And then Stephen responds, beautifully put, you made me think about the precarity of Black LGBTQIA+ life, culture, and history. So the conversation that we're having is about ancestry, connecting, having questions, and doing imaginative work that is critical for archives and for who we are in this world. And I think that their connection of a lineage of reclaiming and recalling history while simultaneously living and breathing and curating that history is what the essence of this collection really pulls from. I'm going to fast forward 2 slides. Let's go to the next slide. And that's this section sort of focuses on the real back end, like the cataloging. So we're not going to go into the cataloging. So we're going to go to the next slide, and then move one more. And I want, to acknowledge those librarians and archivists and curators who do that work, but also as we're with Sinister Wisdom, think through like the lesbianism, right? Like where and when and how does lesbianism come up in community, and the inclusion and gender that is riddled with the curation of these archives. And really it's because archives do the work of naming what we will recall later, or sort of documenting past histories. And the lesbian story is altered depending on who tells it, right? And from which angle it's defined. And so I think that the role of the archivist and having lesbian archivists is actually very important in telling lesbian histories. And so I think the next slide has the folks that I'm gonna quote from. Yeah, so of course, we have lots of hot lesbians in the book who are having hot lesbian conversations. And I wanted to pull from Lizeth Zepeda, who is a university archivist at Loyola Marymount University in LA. And Lizeth is in conversation with her partner and assistant professor, her partner Liliana Gonzalez, who is an assistant professor of gender and women's studies at California State in Northridge. So the reason why I pulled this one is because they're talking about Zakiyah de la Tierra, and I know that there was a recent collection published. I don't know if it was through Sinister Wisdom or if it was through Julie's other press, but it came in the mail from the place where I get the Sinister Wisdom books. And so I thought that I was, that's actually where I have sort of my one collection of Zakiyah de la Tierra. And so their chapter, Paint Me a Dangerous Woman, a conversation about Zakiyah de la Tierra's lesbian poetics and librarianship. It was through Sinister Wisdom, thanks, Julie. I wanted to pull from what they were talking about because it was really a remarkable conversation. So Lizeth says, I read one of Juana Maria Rodriguez's pieces where she writes about Zakiyah de la Tierra. Put it in the chat for you. Oh, it's too long. By the way, she cites Zakiyah de la Tierra, but Zakiyah de la Tierra also cites Juana Maria Rodriguez in her work. And they're both queer Latina powerhouses, each citing each other. It's amazing. And Juana Maria Rodriguez introduces Zakiyah as an archivist. And honestly, Lizeth hadn't thought of Zakiyah de la Tierra as an archivist, but she does do the work of documenting the histories of queer people. And so her partner responds, yes, De la Tierra urges us to think about the power of naming and how language use replicates oppressive structures. And that's something I tell my students. Language is so important to creating real social change. And then I'll close that part out by saying that then Lizeth responds, because now I'm like at my 10-minute mark. I read one of Maria Rodriguez's pieces where she writes about Tatiana de la Tierra. Oh, wait. Did I just put the same thing in twice? All right, I'll stop there. I'll stop there. We'll end it at creating social change. But I wanted to end with more of a bringing it back to why conversations. So that's what I wanted to post. There it goes. And I think that why conversations, you can go to the next slide. I think there is a next slide. Is that conversations, I've decided with my colleague, Sarah, and with, our literature review, that conversation in a queer perspective is switchy and penetrative. It penetrates. It's a top. It's switchy and a top. It's like me. It's a top, switch, top balance. It's a method where we take our whole selves and we engage a range of selfhood, our entire selfhood, and we include our bodies, we include our queer perspectives. This happens in both the conversation and in the archive. We bring to it a match of an entire range of ourselves and other people, and we really can't sort of distort and pull apart ourselves from the act of archiving or the act of being in conversation. So when Sarah and I acknowledge our queer and racialized bodies, we really intended for the collection itself to be a birthing place for fertile ground in the field of archival studies. And so I will end here by quoting Nancy Liliana Godoy, who graciously agreed to write our foreword. And she's the director of community-driven archives and an associate archivist at Arizona State University's library and their Chicana research collection. And she says, for BIPOC and LGBTQ communities, an archive is a collection of feelings and sensations. It's a sacred space. It's more than a repository. And when we heal and return to our bodies, when we heal and return home to our bodies, we find wholeness in that space. And so I love Godoy's foreword to the book, and I'm very excited for it to hit the shelves so that people can read it and learn more about the work of archiving our queer history. So let's take these slides down and let's talk. Hi.
Hi, I'm so inspired by your work. I can't wait to get my hands on your book. A part that, I want to, echo is like the power of conversations. And that's what really excites me about your work. And I find that like within Saffron, like I am building connections, so like building trust and talking to people. That's a large part of my art practice. And what I understand is like how to be a proper archivist or like a community archivist is just like really thinking of it as like a collaborative experience and like really valuing conversation. I'm so excited for your work.
I'm excited for your work. And I have questions for you. I think we had like 2 or 3 preliminary conversations leading up to this one. And all that I kept thinking each time we spoke was, there's so much more that's going to come out of you. Like you're just so young and excitable and you're just doing all this work and have all this energy. And I want to see all of the work that's going to come out of you. And so I'm curious if you can tell me like how you are balancing, because I don't want you to lose this momentum that you have going, how you are balancing this connection that you have to community with also the work of the practice. Like how are you doing both of those things together, and like, and if there are any tensions there?
Yeah, because because I've been working on this for about 2 years, you know, and this is a project like so many other projects made by queer people where like I needed something, you know, to like understand myself, and now I'm tasked with like building it myself. And so like I have been frustrated being like, why isn't this growing? Why aren't more people wanting to see it? Like, how can I make everybody know about what this is? Or and so I just need to, so I've been understanding Saffron as something that's going to grow with me, that's going to be living probably in my home for financial reasons for the next like 10 years. And I'm going to learn skills, and I'm going to learn how to make better finding aids, make better websites, you know, like build connections. Because I see that there are like, you brought up nightlife as like a really important part of queer space and community. And that's a part of like Swana queer community that I have been seeing pop up across the country, like places in parties in LA, San Francisco, or like the Bay Area, Seattle, like Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago. And like there's so much happening, and I want to make sure it's remembered, make sure that people have access to that, make sure that like, yeah, that people know what's going on, know where they can meet people, know where like there's like evidence of like this intersection thriving. And so I'm telling myself it's okay to take things slow. It's okay to like wait until I talk to people who have been in the field for longer than I have, who know things that I have yet to learn, and then apply them to my project. Which is actually a large part of what I did with Sinister Wisdom, is I like cold emailed people at like every community archive and be like, hey, will you meet with me, please? I need to tell you what I'm working on and hear everything that you have to say about it.
Yeah. Can I also say that what's interesting about what you mentioned, like the nightlife, like here's the thing that happened. Let's document it and like provide evidence of it, and then that equals archiving. But then that's one kind of archiving, I think, that I understand and feels really obvious, right? But then I noticed that there are some archival projects that sort of exist for the purpose of archiving them. So it's almost like I'm going to create, and this is my like, I don't know, voice of person in the community. I'm going to create an oral history project, for example, or a documentation project for the purpose of putting it in the archive. So it's almost now like what I'm seeing happen over the course of, you know, the last 10 years maybe, or a little bit more, is that there's the intention of creating a thing for the purpose of preserving it, even though the thing wouldn't have existed without the intention of preserving it. And so I'm curious if you find, like when you were referring to the Coptic Queer Stories series, like is that part of like that kind of thing where the archive is the publication venue? Like it's like the archive is the spot, like that's where it lives. And then I hear, as a result of that, I got to get people to see it, right? Because I think that as an archivist, it's really hard to get people to see stuff in the archive. You know, like the preservation is different than the access point. And so tell me about like how you envision the archive, like in theory, as like what role does it play in the work that you're doing?
So the structure that you mentioned of like people designing projects for the sole purpose of like cataloging and keeping, that I think when I started learning more about archives, I realized that wasn't like standard among archivists, because I as an artist I had like a social practice, you know, like so I'd like get people to like write things down, and then like that was like the project and that would be kept, and that was like a really obvious like performance or like gesture of like capturing information. Then I talked to some archivists about that, of like designing, and it just like kind of went into this like kind of like gray area of like how strong is like the archivist's hand, you know, and like what does that do to things. Yeah, and so that's definitely Coptic Queer Stories is like an act, I think, with digitization, I guess, or social media and everyone making things and like calling Instagram accounts archives, you know, I feel like the lines are more blurry. Like what does it mean to archive something? And so an idea I had in the beginning of creating this community archive project was like also hosting interviews, because agency is like a huge part of the work that I do with this archive. Like making sure that people like consent to having their work being here and it's told the way they want it to be told, instead of like a white academic perspective or like another outside like assumptions about what this person's experience is like. But that project didn't quite take off yet. Like the interviews. So I guess like right now, yeah, I think that most of the stuff that I have in the collection is stuff that is made like kind of like outside of like consideration of the archive at this point. Like Coptic Queer Stories has been like thriving since like 2018, you know, and it's through like building like relationships with people who are like working on it, that they're like, yeah, you know, just like take a copy, and I'm like, okay, cool, thank you so much, you know, this is gonna change someone's life, you know, and like, because it changed mine. So in 20 years it's gonna be amazing, but also in like maybe 2 months.
Yeah, I think it changes the story, right? When someone makes something for the purpose of archiving it versus they're doing an art project or doing a thing, having a bar experience, and then it happens to be archived, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, I mean, I've run into that with both instances where we have like, we're collecting stories for the archive. Then you get people who are ready to like tell the version of the story that's like their version of the story. And that's important, and I want to encourage people to do that. But I think also there's challenges for like when you're collecting people's work or materials that may not tell the story that they want to tell, right? Like that may actually tell a harder story, or the real story rather. What's your experiences with, I keep getting back to the tensions. Tell me the hard stuff.
Yeah, we can talk again after this. It's been exciting. Yeah, I found that having this project, it's me, it's my home, you know, it's really at this point built on like my relationships with people. And it's such a shame that within like so many SWANA orgs, just like that I've known from I lived in Los Angeles and Philadelphia, and just seeing like the conflict, you know, between people just is like so messy and unnecessary. And so, yeah, currently like I don't know, there's always drama between queer people, I don't know, and like everybody. And so it was really important, I think, within the last year of me to really decide that this project is like by me, and it's like my connections with people, and it's not like with anybody else, you know, it's not like no one else is overseeing this except for me at this point. And so like if there's people don't want to be involved, it's like all on me, you know. And so I know that there are materials like relating to some collections that would be like, wow, that would really capture like the drama, you know, involved with like this org or this space, but I haven't acquired those materials yet. And so that's something that I'm like definitely more interested in, like more like kind of like personal papers and like writing and notes, and to kind of like show like the human hand a little bit more. Yeah, and I think that's also like why this project may be like slower, is because there's like interpersonal relationships that I need to like balance, you know. And I think that there are people who are close to me who are like, why are you doing it this way, not this way, you know, or like why are you focused on something that's like specifically SWANA and queer, like you're Coptic, Copts are kind of like rare and shiny, you know, you're 10% of Egyptians, why don't you just talk about them, you know. And yeah, I think long term, when I figure out where this collection will eventually be housed, whether or not it's in like a queer archive or it's like in an Arab space, like how do people feel about like being lumped under like the Arab identity? There will be like as you're saying earlier, like language is so powerful. There will be I know the conversations to be had, but yeah, whatever drama comes with this project, I hope it's well documented so it can be part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited for the future of your archival collection, and I'm gonna echo Morgan's question in the chat, which is like, you already mentioned that you're thinking about like the repository of this collection, like where it's gonna live, because it could live with you forever, but also like we don't live forever individually. And wanting to think through like how the community can step in and really nourish your venture. Morgan asks, I'm curious about how KT got more into this work. I do not have formal archival training or education, but I'm steadily realizing how important this work is for queer people. What's the best way to support you as well? So I wanted to read it out loud.
Yeah, you can email me and we'll talk about it. I work really well talking with people at people about things. So another person being like, I think this might actually be a smarter way to do that would be amazing. Yeah, otherwise even like through Sinister Wisdom, I've had some people email like asking to like donate books and like parts of like their collections, which has been like really beautiful and wonderful. And so I guess like also letting more people know about this project, and they're like, hey, actually I want to like check out this publication or read about this artist, or like I'm looking particularly like at Egyptian women, you know. Yeah, you can send them my way, and I think working with more people who want to explore the collections will teach me a lot about how to better structure what I'm doing. Yeah, that's very sweet, Morgan.
And I wanted to say something to that too, because part of what I find, having worked for pay, I guess, as an archivist versus working voluntarily at a community archive like Lesbian Herstory Archives. So I guess the distinction between an institutional archive and a community archive, the differences are pretty directly applied to what gets collected, how much of what gets collected is collected, who decides what's coming into the collection, right? And then how that material is accessed and utilized in the community. And you know, I think you can insinuate which direction I'm going for, you know, which angle that is. But I think inclusive in that conversation of community versus institution is also the question of like your own agency to the collection too, right? Like what you're actually giving over. And so when people are giving you their materials, you know, are they signing off also to send it to X institution or Y institution? And I think one thing I would challenge you to think through is creating those donor agreements from the start, so that like, even if the donor agreement says this could go anywhere and you have nothing to say about it, but acknowledging that this isn't always going to live here, and instead it's going to live in like another space. And I hope that you trust me to make that choice on your behalf, kind of thing. Because it could come up later if, you know, if the collection will migrate, that someone might not want something in another location versus one other.
Yeah, that is a really important piece of advice that I'm working through in editing. And yeah, I looked at Lesbian Herstory Archives donor agreements, and I have them saved as PDFs in a Google Drive to reference. And speaking to like how money really influences what stories are in archives, that is like a really huge part of like why I am collecting things myself, and like saying I am a queer, or I'm a lesbian Coptic person, and these are people I know and love and who I know are doing things, and I know whose stories don't benefit this agenda that, you know, this board member really wants to push by having these items in the collection. And so through this project, I got one grant from Philly, but it is, you know, my love and my labor that's keeping this alive. And I feel like that allows me to pace it in the way that like works for my current lifestyle and social life, health, and etc. But like the structure of like having donor agreements and like proper accession records and housing things correctly, I feel like that's something that I'm working towards, like creating like the concrete systems of being like, okay, is this, am I digitizing things, or is it, so right now it's mostly a physical collection that lives in my home that people can access and read about, and yeah, and talk to me about, and like come see if they're in Philadelphia. I'm really inspired by the Carter Johnson archives. Have you been there? The like leather archives in Chicago, or like they're in Chicago, but it's not like the leather archives.
I have.
There's someone told me about this one guy who like who would take her archive on like leather history and like BDSM and put it in her van and just like drive it places, you know, and drive it to conferences. And I was like, that is so incredible. That's exactly what archives, like community archives, should be. So right now my archive can fit in my car and it can be taken somewhere. So send me an address, you know. Like,
I love that.
yeah.
Leave it to the woman on the road. I think that's the best way to think through like what this archive is and how it's going to move through and be in conversation with communities. That's
and what's accessibility like look like, you know. It's like, I know a bunch of like Swana queer people are gonna be here, you know, they should know what this person's doing in, you know, in Canada, you know. That'd be really awesome if that, you know, had spaces. And yeah,
I mean, that's definitely how LHA had it in the beginning.
Yes.
So,
That's great. I hate to be the person who is watching the clock just nip up at that top of the hour, but that's partially my role in this. I want to thank you both for this great conversation. It's so interesting, and it's so wonderful to see us thinking about new archival spaces, how archives are literally on the road and moving around. I found that really exciting. And I want to thank everyone for coming. We do have, I just want to highlight that we have, again, you can order the calendar. A new issue of Sinister Wisdom is coming up. We have a whole series of events this fall. They're all available at sinisterwisdom.org/events. And as always, for those of you who are regular attendees of our Zoom events, we end with the L Word by songwriter Carol Kramer, performed by Your Girlfriend and produced by Esther Records. As you listen to the music, you're welcome to stand up and dance. When the music ends, the Zoom call ends. Thank you to Shanta and KT for this great program, and we'll see you next time. Max, go ahead and start the music.
thanks.